Like polarizing extremes?
Well, we don't have a parliamentary system. Otherwise you might see like what we've seen in Israel, which is the Kadima party, for example. But I think the desire for that is what has caused independence to grow. I mean, the growth of independence, the largest and fastest growing segment of the electorate, is in direct reaction to the polarization of the two parties. It is an expression of anger and dissatisfaction with the choices we're being given, especially because they're so polarized. And most independents are fiscally conservative and socially liberal libertarian. You know, this is not a totally, incoherent group. There is a common theme here. They're too fiscally conservative for Democrats and too socially liberal for Republicans. But our system has been so stratified and effectively hijacked that neither party has been able to get itself enough away from the special interests at the base of its party to meet that need. There is a market disconnect. And that is what's happening right now. And it's happening especially among young voters. I mean, think about it. Those of us grown up with a multiplicity of choice in every aspect of our lives. And yet politics is the last place where we are expected to be satisfied between a choice between brand A and brand B. Politics is still run by industrial age rules. They have not woken up to information age reality. They are going to. The question is whether they wake up sooner or later.
And we have a fellow up front here, if we can get the microphone to him as well. But do you think, John, while we're waiting for the microphone to be passed, that the addition of a third and potentially a fourth party could help to tamp down some of this?
I think we're more looking at de-alignment. There may come a time where there's a third party. I mean, there's a couple of scenarios down the line where you could end up seeing the far right split off from the Republican Party, the far left then split off from the Democratic Party, and the centrists in both parties realize that actually all along they've had a lot more in common with each other than the extremes in either party. That's one option which is sitting right in front of us. These forces, the tectonic plates of politics are shifting. How it actually ends up unfolding, we've yet to see, but I could see that scenario as much as any other.
Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Bob Kaplan, a visiting Canadian.
Hello, Bob Kaplan.
We're paying attention up there. And I wanted to ask you...
If memory serves me correctly, you're a former politician, correct?
Yeah, I am.
Yes.
But I wanted to talk about...
Canadian.
Well, it seems to me it's a little naive to talk about the center taking power again without taking account of lobbyists, which I think tend to prefer the extremes.
Well, sure.
If you're a lobbyist, you know where the extreme part stands, and the guy in the middle who's going to be reasonable is more of a problem.
It's not as easy to buy off. You raise a good point, but I would only say that our ultimate trump card is democracy. Lobbyists and politicians have a funny way of listening to numbers. They'll go where the majorities are. The problem is they have been able to successfully subdivide our country, and the special interests have succeeded in hijacking our politics, and it's to their benefit. You're right. They like it just the way it is. The math is pretty simple. The problem is it's fundamentally unrepresentative, and I don't mind sounding idealistic. I just think the whole key is to balance idealism with realism. We need to recognize there's a disconnect going on. We don't need to buy in to this hyper-polarized vision of politics, which has been hijacked by the extremes. We will never change human nature. There are always going to be cranks and conspiracy theorists among us. But we don't have to accept their domination of our politics. That's the message. We can stand up to the extremes on both sides.
Well, let me make one more point. I think we're going to have to wrap it there. In terms of standing up to extremists on both sides, you say in the chapter on solutions, how we bring the country back together again, quote, the moderate majority needs to stand up to the extremes before they spark a real season of violence. We have done this before, and we can do it again. Put it in historic context for us about doing it before, and how do we do it again now when the Wingnuts have such a powerful megaphone, a megaphone they never had in the past?
Thank you, and it's an important question. First of all, there's a fundamental case for optimism. We have faced down extremist groups throughout our history. We have confronted the KKK. We have confronted far-left radical groups that were incredibly violent in a way that we've forgotten only 30, 40 years ago. We have defeated the John Birch Society, and now it's back. We stood up to Joe McCarthy, and he slunk away. So whenever anybody tells you that, the only thing in the middle of the road are yellow lines and dead armadillos, you tell them, there's a quote from Jim Hightower, you trump them with Dwight Eisenhower, who said that the middle of the road is all the usable surface. The extremes of left and right are in the gutters. That's a deeper wisdom. That's a deeper source of strength we can draw on. I think we can take America back from the lunatic fringe because we've got the numbers. They may be screaming loudest, but they don't have the votes. They don't have the bodies. And I think there are three things we can do. First thing I think we need to do is have more of us declare our independence. We need to get away from this de facto situation of always excusing the extremes on our side. Because, oh, they may be crazy, but there are crazies. Because then we just feed the problem. More Americans declare their independence and register independence, and the parties are going to have to compete for their vote. They're not going to be able to take them for granted as much. That shakes up the political calculus. Already, the parties should be panicked about the fact that 40% of the American public has rejected them. Now, they're in denial about it because it's their interest. But that's the first thing, declare your independence. Second thing is there's a policy prescription. I think we need to undo the rigged system of redistricting. If we had open primaries and nonpartisan redistricting, it would incentivize politicians to move to the center. And all the political consultants who are so, preaching political-based politics, you're going to find they'll change their tune overnight. Because this isn't about principle of them near as much as it's about simply winning. And they'll play by whatever rules are changed. And the rules we work with in American politics are not made by God, they're made by man, and we can change them.
And where do you come down on the argument over the reimplementation of the fairness doctrine on the nation's airwaves?
I'm against it because I think it ends up becoming a speech code that is unenforceable and un-American. But I do believe that that's why the only cure for bad speech is more speech. We need to engage in this debate more. We need to stand up more in the center. And that's the final thing we need to do, is that we need to stand up in the center and play offense, not defense, and punch the far right and the far left as our conscience and common sense dictates. If we can do that, we can shift the momentum, we can shift the dynamic, and approach this problem from a position of strength, not weakness, offense, not defense. We can take the power back from the extremes because we have the numbers. Extremists always have a terrible sense of humor. They're very rigid and inflexible. Well, if we can start all of a sudden calling out the extremes for the absurdity that they so often embrace, for the inflexibility they constantly try to advance, if we can do that and punch left and right and start standing up to the extremes on both sides, we can absolutely take America back from the lunatic fringe.
The book is called Wingnuts, How the Lunatic Fringe is Hijacking America. John Avlon, buddy, it's great to see you.
Good to see you.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you to John Roberts and John Avlon. John is going to stick around and sign copies of Wingnuts. Thank you all for coming tonight. Upcoming events is at strandbooks.com. Thank you all for coming.
All right, I'm going to bed.
All right, get out of here. Good day tomorrow.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, man.
Thanks for seeing Absolutely.
Hey.
Bob, I think I met you 100 years ago. John Roberts.
So I stay here and sign? Do you mind? Not at all.
You were.
All right, you got it.